I am Black business. From the moment I wake until the time I sleep. Yes, I am Black business. I am Black business. Tell me, are you Black business? I am Black business. Do you support Black businesses? Listen, I support Black business because I am Black business. Black Business Expo, one of the largest business showcases in the history of Black business in the world. The world! Sign up today at www.blackbusinessexpousa.com or call 919-308-9090. I am Black business.
Good evening, everyone. Morning, depending where you're at. Business owners, entrepreneurs, thought leaders, and corporations, welcome to the Black Business Network. My name is Grant McGaw, CEO of 5-Star BDM, where we help you to build a 5-star brand that people will follow. I'm your business moderator for this evening on the Black Business Network. The Black Business Network is a 24-hour business network showcasing Black businesses, business owners, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders worldwide. We have speakers from North Carolina, London, Singapore, Africa, Japan, and cities all over the United States. The Black Business Network is a global community sharing its business knowledge to empower, inspire, and educate businesses about business. Our next speaker is Douglas Freeman. Douglas Freeman is the president of the Global Reflections and Inclusive Leadership Inclusion Practice at UniWorld Group Incorporated, a global multicultural communication and advertising firm. UWG, at 51 years old, is the oldest multicultural DEI firm in the United States. Global Reflections is a sophisticated line of client offerings that provide corporations with a deep portfolio of holistic diversity and inclusion best practices customized to the client's specific business needs. Mr. Freeman and UWG have completed diversity and inclusion projects for some of the world's leading organizations, from Disney and Major League Baseball to Morgan Stanley and the European Union Commission in Brussels. I present to you Douglas Freeman.
Hello, Grant. How are you today?
I am feeling so much better because you are here, and we're going to have a candid conversation with Douglas Freeman. Now, normally, I would step off the stage, but because you are part of the 5-star team that is participating in this month's triathlon on the Black Business Olympics, I get to have a fireside chat directly with you.
Fantastic. This is absolutely exciting. I wanted to congratulate you, Grant, on what a wonderful event, what a wonderful occasion. And it's so fantastic that we have a global community to share this great work that you're doing. Kudos to you and your fantastic and brilliant team.
Well, thank you. Thank you. We're gonna start this off really quick because this is the question that's been coming to me over and over again, probably since the Floyd incident. Because I'm older, right? I'm not going to date you, but I'm going to date myself. No, I come from this.
Myself at some point.
We're going to date ourselves a little bit, but I come from this affirmative action world. Right? We had affirmative action in the 70s. You know, hey, we're done. It's civil rights. We passed laws, and it made it illegal to discriminate against people, whether they're Black, they're white, their race, their religion, their ethnicity, their sexual orientation. Didn't matter. You cannot discriminate. Why are we still having a DE&I, diversity, equity, and inclusion discussion Not even a discussion. We have to have models and practices and things that you do in 2023. Help me understand that.
Yeah, that's a really great question, Grant. As you mentioned, we would hope that with all these years of work from the early days, civil rights legislation, affirmative action, and then moving to the late 80s, the diversity movement, and then inclusion, and now diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, the natural conclusion would be that a lot of great progress should have been made, and that a lot of the hard work should move to perhaps the next generation style of diversity, equity, inclusion. I think we have realized that there are gross realities that conflict against that conclusion. Now, part of the challenge on a global scale is looking at these big demographic shifts. There are massive demographic shifts that in many regards are critical to the advancement of society, but perhaps these shifts have not been as effectively managed on a societal scale to allow society to engender human beings, even on an individual or institutional level. The way we like to describe this, Grant, is 6 strands or 6 major global population shifts that are impacting everything. And those differences in impacts ultimately lead to peer-to-peer interactions that have discrimination at their core. We start with age, and we have such a massive spectrum, 6 going on 7 different groups in our workforces all around the globe. We look at disabilities. We look at gender, sexual orientation, and then we go into the big catch-all bucket of race, ethnicity, and we can't forget this immigration, right?
Yeah.
And so all of these major types of shift are buffeting our shores. It's not just U.S. shores, it's Australian shores, it's Malaysian shores, it's African, it's Nigerian shores, it's the shores of Kuwait, right? All of the countries are being affected in some way, shape, or form by these big, massive population shifts. And this has happened in a way that perhaps hasn't occurred in the past. And these shifts matter, and they matter to identity, they matter to society. So everywhere in the world, people are grappling with how do we manage all of these differences in our society in a way to make our society wholesome, robust, and empowered versus denigrated, discriminated, and undermined.
Whew. Wow, you unpacked a lot there.
We have to
I
come
mean,
at a
no,
good pace, right?
you answered, first of all, you answered my question. This ain't just an American problem.
No.
This is a global shift in humanity. Because I hear about certain things in Europe where they're dealing with immigration, that's coming up from I think it's the Middle East,
Mm-hmm.
and things of that nature. And, how do they deal with that? And, it's causing population shifts or policy shifts and things of that nature. And what does this really look like? You start finding other people in other sections that you don't even really think about.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess because we are in the U.S., we rather think, oh, this is just, our issue because, the dynamics might be a little different.
Correct.
Fundamentally, it might be similar as far as what we're dealing with. You brought up the immigration, like, wow, immigration. Like, but, you got the war that's going on in Russia that's impacting Russia, Ukraine, that's impacting all of that. That entire continent is probably, shifted, changed, right?
Absolutely. That's a great connector piece. If the world were just race and gender, you would not see 2 primary Caucasian societies at war, right? that wouldn't be happening. When you look at, you know, a lot of people have done a lot of analysis about Ukraine and Russia and their deep historic roots. And the way I like to think of it for Americans is that, you know, Ukraine is a big country, 44, 50 million people. And Russia is a big country, you know, 150 million. So these big countries at loggerheads. And to me, the way I look at it, it's almost as if Texas were to secede. Texans have a very unique cultural feel. And if there were a breaking point where Texas were to secede and come out of America, you know, there would be the question of how would they align geopolitically. And of course, anybody worth a grain of salt would leverage that, whether they're Russia or North Korea, Iran, and they would try to align with Texas. And if you can imagine that over time, that would really wear thin on very patriotic Americans. And I would think at some point, 10, 20, 30 years in that breakup, there would likely be a war.
Wow.
And that's how I look at the Ukrainian situation. You know, similar roots, but fundamentally different. Very big region, unique. But, you know, Texans would fight to the hilt. They would fight to the hilt. Ukrainians would are fighting to the hilt against Russia. I think the big difference is as we can see, the Russian military has not perhaps performed at the level that everybody assumed they would. I think a U.S. military, I mean, I wouldn't want to project Texas versus the U.S., but it would be a different outcome for sure.
Man, these are interesting topics. The thing I get from you is that you're culturally conscious, that you understand culture. So when you're dealing with diversity, equity, inclusion, you've got a process in which, now we're going to talk about from a business aspect, right?
Yes.
You know, that because you've done this for a long time. You've done it in different continents. You've come together with a state-of-the-art process and program that you institute in world-class organizations. Tell us more about that.
Sure. You know, there have been a lot of stops and starts and a lot of valiant efforts and investment approaches to diversity. But ultimately, I think, as you know, Grant, we want to do diversity well, and we want to have sustainability. And so there are lessons learned on fundamentally how do you do diversity well from start to finish. And like anything else, you learn that simplicity starts to answer. And our simplistic approach, but we think very methodologically sound, effective, is what we call our 3 A's. A is an apple. And when you start with any kind of diversity initiative, you know, oftentimes people have passion and they want to do the right thing, but you have to start with the first A, which is a bit of it's a combo: acknowledgement, but the big piece is assessment. Right? You have to be able, through data-driven assessment, determine where you stand for diversity, equity, inclusion, because all organizations are different. They can be in the same industry, they can be right next door, they can be on the same block, but all diversity, equity, inclusion organizations have different needs and different drivers. So assessment is the first bit. The second piece is actions. And it's not just any actions, it's prioritized. And those actions are prioritized because you've done assessments that tell you, hey, if we have 10 key issues, here are the top 2 for the short term, here are the next 3 for the middle term, and here are the remaining 5 for the long term, because you've put in the work with effectively assessing. And then the third piece is accountability. And accountability is metrics, as people would think about it. It's the outcomes and making sure we hit our goals and objectives. But it's deeper than that, particularly in this current environment, which is volatile. And in this volatile environment, we've basically seen bifurcation, a split in the road of how particularly larger organizations are continuing on the diversity journey. Some organizations have chosen not to proceed and have retrogressed. And I think Many people have seen this in the news, particularly in Silicon Valley. Twitter had 30 DEI leaders, and they now have 2. Well, that's not what you'd hope to see on a journey. But many of the other organizations in the United States are doubling down, which is great. And what you like to see is not only doubling down, but how do organizations react to DEI initiatives when times are tough? For example, restructuring, cutbacks. What is the ramification of diversity, equity, inclusion? We have a couple clients who've restructured, and in one case, their diversity effort has actually grown. Right? That is a great metric. How do people react when times are tough with DEI? And the reason is that they went through the 3 A's and they have the accountability, and it's grounded in their organization that this is core to the DNA of the business, and it doesn't stop just because there's restructuring or a temporal situation or a temporary situation in the environment. You have a long-term game plan, usually 5+ years, and you implement it and execute it, and you drive it like any other great business initiative. Pardon me.
These are interesting frameworks that you've put together. I want you to talk about results. You've implemented these things. What has been the results on the other side of the ball?
Sure.
In what you've dealt with? Not only talk about the results, but talk about the challenges to get to those results.
Sure. It starts with we like to build what we call DEI business plans. Right now, what's core to a business plans? And that is actually different just from a diversity strategy. A diversity strategy oftentimes has cultural data and best practices data. But DEI business strategy has something that we have built called diversity ROI data, diversity return on investment. Diversity return on investment is a relatively straightforward model. We all have missed business opportunities in our business environments and other environments. There's something called a subset called missed diversity business opportunities. We call those blind spots. And a DROI approach does 3 things. You identify, quantify, and monetize those blind spots. So that's core to a business plan is finance. So when we build these plans, this is not just cultural data, not just best practices. This is also financial and economic value data. So we can clearly state to any client we work with, this is a diversity business plan. That's the beginning of building long-term sustainability, because business, when it comes to diversity, it's oftentimes a business environment, diversity is not the same as it would be in an educational or mission-centric environment. It's a hybrid. It's always the right thing to do, but diversity must have business value, and it must be a business initiative as well, because business initiatives survive. So it's a hybrid of the right thing to do in business initiative. So the first thing is this DEI business plan. The next pieces go to, your people and talent are still core to so much of diversity. And we like to see what we call building out an inclusive talent life cycle from sourcing to succession planning. If you get to the heart of the early pieces that you described, discrimination, there are barriers and breakdowns from the moment you source, and it doesn't take too much imagination. If you're an organization in Colorado, and all, as much as we now love University of Colorado State even more, but if you're not recruiting at even community colleges that might have more diverse talent, or you're not recruiting at HBCUs, or you're not recruiting through diverse circles, you already have created a breakdown in your inclusion model that you're already typically behind in the overall reflection of the communities you serve, because you just don't outreach to reflective pools of talent. So at the very beginning of the life cycle, you already have breakdowns. So imagine as you continue from sourcing to recruiting to onboarding to performance evaluation to promotions to succession planning, every step of the way, we identify breakdowns. And our job on the talent side is to recognize what those are, put analytics around them, and reverse them, remove the breakdowns, and create really, it's very ironic. And I know there's so much noise around diversity. We're actually creating a fair competitive environment.
Mm-hmm.
Scales are tilted in the current life cycle model, intentionally or unintentionally, and this is not a judgment. This is actually an efficiency competition issue.
Mm.
Is your talent life cycle efficient to drive optimal value so that your organization thrives? Yes or no? If you have breakdowns and you're not going into those untapped pools, and then when the untapped pools come in, there are breakdowns around them, you are not an efficient competitor.
Nice. I'm thinking through this. What came to my mind was this, and I saw this on a couple of shows I watched, and it was just fictitious and whatnot. But just watching the show, it said, "Oh yeah, this guy came in. He's a diversity hire." This is kind of a thing that people are saying, which is terrible. You're like, "Oh wow," it's like the affirmative action program. Well,
Right.
you just you're just a token person in this organization. They just hired you not because you're talented and because you're good or anything. You're the diversity hire. How do you work with those cultural, and that's what human beings will do, right? They're trying to take you out where you're most vulnerable. How do you deal with that?
So, there's two sides of it. There's a talent side and a culture side. So on the talent side, it's making sure that leaders and managers are not using terminologies. This process that we've discussed about making efficient talent life cycles that are competitive or optimally competitive is what we call a competitive diverse pipeline.
Mm-hmm.
Because implicitly, what we are actually saying is that your pipeline isn't.
Yeah.
And it isn't. You can empirically show it. It is not optimally competitive. It is competitive, but not optimally competitive. So that's the first piece. When you place the notion of competitive diverse pipeline, when we bring in new source of talent from untapped pools, that talent just competes. And if it naturally competes over time, law of averages, you'll start to get more reflective pools and diverse talent will emerge in its appropriate way because the barriers have been removed. So that's one side of the house. But what a lot of breakdowns occur, as you mentioned, Grant, in the culture, and that's the inclusive leader. What kind of a leader and what kind of leadership cultures are we building? Are we building cultures of inclusion, engagement, high performance? And the data is very clear that inclusion drives engagement. And when you drive engagement, you get 5 major business outcomes. You get improved productivity, you get reduced turnover, you get improved safety, you get improved customer loyalty, and you get improved profitability. So that's all empirically proven. So what that means is you've got to strive to do that. And when you talk about the challenges of a culture, it starts with this overall, a lot of people talk a big picture, people experience. You've got to have a great people experience. Well, the simple nature of the people experience is a very basic building block, and it's called peer-to-peer interaction.
Mm-hmm.
Peer-to-peer interaction happens every moment, every time of every day in the workplace. And it's not the same old peer interaction. It's the amplified peer interaction that you just suggest. You just got this, you are a diversity hire, boom. Sparks are flying just in the terminology. And that's an amplified peer that people, we probably go through millions of interactions. The ones we remember are amplified. Something went awry, and it's usually a leadership breakdown or it's an inclusivity breakdown. So the reason for being of inclusive leaders is not just to be nice or no.
Right.
Once again, that's a cultural efficiency issue. When you have multiple amplified peer-to-peer interactions, you have a culture that breaks down and crumbles and is not engaging. And when cultures break down and crumble and they're not engaging, you lose money. It's just that simple. So any business leader, doesn't matter what your political percentage, because we hear, oh, is this, these terms that don't even mean anything. I'll address, the term woke. That's the most ridiculous term. That doesn't mean anything. Okay? It's just an empty term that people put out. No, this is business efficiency. Sorry to break the news to you. So if you have cultures that break down in inclusion, the data will show you will lose money and you will not thrive. So why bother doing that? Why don't you flip it and build, we can go into what kind of leadership competencies and models we like to build up. But ultimately that starts to answer we answer the talent side on the diversity hire. We can't just once you remove that notion of diversity hire, you still have to build cultures and leaders so that they don't break down the talent life cycle and that this great new talent flows through and drives value like any other talent.
Man, wow! You said that. To me, that's like a very you sharpened a very sharp and pointed arrow that can actually move through the inertia that we have. I'm just talking about the United States because I know it the most, to move that forward, because you need to understand, as a culture, especially when you have a world view, as a culture, Americans are Americans.
Mm-hmm.
I don't care who, you identify yourself African American, this, that, and the other. Once you leave these shores, you realize real quick you're just an American. And we've got to get over that. We need to understand one thing I learned, and I learned this late in life. I didn't even know this. When I graduated high school in 1981.
Mm-hmm.
At the time, America was 80% Caucasian.
Mm-hmm.
And, made of others, same percentage of Black people, 13 to 15%. That really hasn't moved. When my son graduated high school in 2004 or so, America was 60% Caucasian. That's a huge shift. Now, it wasn't like 20% more African Americans all of a sudden showed up. No, there was a lot of other. You talked about immigration.
Mm-hmm.
This has occurred because this continent and where we're located is located in an area that promotes more Latin growth than anything else. If you want to call it Latin, Spanish, whatever, it's just the natural people that lived here for thousands of years. But this is what's happening. The point I'm making is that in order to be successful as a nation, we have to be inclusive of the entire family.
That's exactly right.
Right? You can't just feed, 2 of your kids. Don't feed the other 2 or 3. They're your children, the citizens of this country. How are you now going to alienate them and your competitive nature? Like, I'm not going to nurture that. Well, you remember you're competing in a world market.
That's right.
So you're really just you're depleting yourself. And I use this one more analogy that I love this now, and I could be wrong, but I don't think so. I remember when Colin Kaepernick, was big in the news and whatnot, when things were going through, and then Nike said we're going to pull, the Kaepernick line, and we're not going to do anything, with them. And they had a realization that, our stakeholders maybe are 50-year-old white men. But however, the people that buy our shoes are 20 to 30-year-old Black and brown people.
That's exactly right.
So what are you doing?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It's a great point. We have a complex universe, right? It's the differences are creating more complexity, but that just requires us to be more focused and how we manage the differences and the realities. And the data shows that when we manage differences effectively, particularly in the business environment, while it may be, the diverse teams may be harder to manage in the early phase, the innovation and value that is driven is greater than those that aren't. And Scott Page and others have shown empirically, particularly for difficult business situation and challenges why that is the case in the empirical models. So that is clear. And if we're looking at competitive advantage, the harsh reality is, whether we called it Irish people or Indian or Latin American, we've always had different types of people from different backgrounds who have brought something incredible to the table in the United States that has driven so much great innovation and so much great growth. And we still are, regardless of how hard China tries, and regardless of the pandemic, we're a $30 trillion economy. We are the big kahuna. And you could argue that we're a very flabby and unfit economy. There are strong arguments to suggest that if we could more effectively skill up our scale population with better education, more effectively allocate our resource investment, and more effectively we really globally outward. We have to understand that 10 to 15% of the U.S. population has a passport. Well, that's not good enough. And I'm not asking everybody to learn French or another language, because that'll take a while. But you can get a passport. Anybody can get a passport. It's not the same being on the internet looking at countries around the world. You have to go into different cultures, and you really have to learn what it's like to function as a society somewhere else that is fundamentally different. Because once you have that, what I call a global eye, it informs how you work in the US. You start to think, you compare and contrast. And usually that knowledge helps you be more effective. Business is on continuous improvement. What better way to continuously improve if all of our citizens could compare and contrast the differences of what works well in, let's say, in Germany or China? If we all knew that and then compare it to today, we'd probably do a lot of things better.
Yeah. Very interesting subject. I'm going to switch the conversation a little bit and pivot back to UWG. You are owned by African American women. Is that? Give us a little history around that.
Yes, it's a great organization, and thank you for asking, Grant. UWG, and I get my years. One day it's 51, it's 50. I think it's 53, 54. I'll get the numbers right afterwards, so everybody doesn't rain down on social media that the guy doesn't even know the age. It's 50 something. Okay, it's been a while. We were founded by amazing founder who saw in the late 60s this vision of engaging growing segments. You mentioned Colin Kaepernick. The growing segments existed many, many years ago, and that's the real genesis of multicultural marketing. But in 2012, Mr. Byron Lewis, sold the majority portion of the firm to our current chair and owner and her family, Monique Nelson. And then, so it's a diverse supplier, but we have an interesting structure where 49% is owned by one of the world's largest advertising holding companies, WPP. So it gives us a very unique hybrid approach. We have access to all these big global networks. We have, in the range of about 300. Monique's probably triple the size of the organization since 2012. And one of the ways she felt there was value, untapped value, was having a DEI practice. And so in 2018, we officially built the Global Reflections and Inclusive Leadership practice. At the time, I'd been running, I founded many years ago the World Diversity Leadership Summit in Prague in 2004, built a consulting firm, Vercom Consulting, and had been doing work. And then in 2017, I took on a role as Chief Diversity Officer for $1 billion health plan at LA, which went well, but I really wanted to have a different kind of consulting approach. And I just felt bringing our boutique firm inside a great organization like Monique to build this very synergistic practice was the right thing to do. And of course, George Floyd hit and we exploded in growth. We have well over 30 consultants all around the world, the bulk in North America, but from the UK to Asia Pac. So we have a nice global footprint as well. And we've been able to build solutions that have real impact. I mean, we have clients that have been around year after year after years that get better in DEI. They thrive, and they learn more, and they innovate more, and they build organizations that ultimately are more effective when DEI is core to the DNA of the organization and is truly business integrated.
You said a very important thing. When you start to talk about D&I as a strategy, not as just a human resource or a reaction to like, okay, yeah, we need to include our Black people, in our employment and part of our organization. Not realizing, you need to understand if you deplete an entire group of people from the economic resources, and not only just deplete them for a couple of years, but for hundreds of years.
Correct.
And then you don't want to take responsibility for the conditions that were created by policy and want to blame the people now for the condition. This is something we need to address. And it's like, we need to take ownership. And I say we, I mean, the greater society, the American society, take ownership of how this got to be where it is and why. Take ownership. I don't want to talk about reparations, this, that, and like, no, we have to invest in the greatest resource we have is our people.
Correct.
We don't invest in our people. What are we investing in? We've asked, and I'll speak directly to my African-American people. We've been asked to fight in every single war for our freedom. And yet that same freedom that we fought for has not been afforded to us. The same realities. I still get upset when I hear about these things after World War II. Like, everybody got the GI Bill. This is when America really took off. And you got the GI Bill, and it afforded a lot of people that came back as veterans to get like, hey, this is your 40 acres and a mule. We're going to give you this GI Bill, and you're going to have an opportunity to grow your family and build community and move forward. Oh, by the way, you African-American person, Black person, that's not going to be given to you. Wow, what a slap in the face. And then the audacity to tell me that I got to go through civil rights now just to get basic rights. We're not talking about a leg up. We're just like, I just want to compete on a level playing field. That's what I'm asking for, because I ain't going nowhere. This is my home. I'm bone of your bone, as Baldwin said. We are Americans. We are Americans. Yet we've been treated for hundreds of years like we're something else. I don't know why, but it's such an attitude that I feel is the culprit in the room, the elephant in the room that has to be removed. We can't continue to look at people as if they're less than, because you found it was a leverage, and everybody knows, we call it as it is, certain people got advantage over that. There's an advantage because you took a player off the field, put him on the bench as you grew your society, and this player couldn't even play in the game to even compete. But now we compete, sports, entertainment, a lot of the fields are like, wow, we're done because we do have skill sets. But we don't want to continue this conversation as if we're less than, because we're in a global economy in which people are the assets. We've got to invest in ourselves. Anything you'd like to state with that?
Absolutely. We have a very interesting opposing situation of history. For you track 400 years of, I don't call it slavery, it's terrorism that happened. When you're talking about the dehumanization, beatings, sexual assaults, and the lack of ability to fight, look at Ukraine. That's a tough situation, but they have billions of dollars of weaponry. We didn't have billions of dollars or whatever. If we could have fought, yeah, likely there'd be a different kind of policy model. Let's just put it that. But we didn't have that. So there are a lot of things that went awry. And there were a lot of policies that institutionally were designed, particularly as we gained freedoms, to remove them. That was dominant culture strategy, and not, ironically, as many of us reflect on it, not particularly brilliant strategy. To be honest, pretty basic stuff. I'm sure if we all got together and thought through it a little better, because you might have wanted to. That's terrible.
Yeah.
But it wasn't that complex. It's just blunt instrument stuff. Okay, so now you evolving in the 60s, and now we're getting civil rights. And one of the things that we can't forget is, as bad as it was, there was still a backdoor track to integration, or I wouldn't even say pure integration, to participation in society, and that backdoor track was education. And even when there was the separation of every education, by fluke or chance, at the end of the day, and I just have to give you a heads up, Grant, I may have to shift my computer to get my plug in. I've been trying to have this perfect view, but it's going to die in about 2 minutes if I don't shift. So
We've only got a couple of minutes left.
But ultimately, Grant, HBCUs. Let's think about that. If you look at marginalized cultures around the world, nobody had 100 institutions to build them up.
Yeah.
So when the 1970s hit and the explosion of opportunities for particularly Black and brown professionals occurred, that HBCU bedrock talent walked into many political positions and legal positions and I know that's an untold story. And I'm not patting America on the back because they did it for all the wrong reasons, but it is a fact that this big HBCU backbone, for whatever reason, created giants of talent that enabled Blacks to participate relatively quickly in society, which doesn't exist in South Africa, which doesn't exist in other parts of the world. So this is, I think there's just this huge untold story of when I look at Blacks in the 70s, there were so many great Black professionals out of nowhere. It's because of the HBCUs.
Nice.
That's why. So we have this mixed, yes, it's all slanted, got it. But we got this backbone and we've leveraged it. And to this day, some of the greatest talent comes out of the HBCU platform. What it tells us as a people, to me, is scale. How do we leverage the HBCUs and other learning to get the best in class education first to everyone? And that, whether you believe in charter schools or other models, you got to have a model for K to 12 that's as powerful as HBCU and scaled, that allows us to at least walk on the playing field. Then Step 2 is the models that I am doing and others and so many others, great work that they're doing. This will be converted to society next. We will have to work society writ large to remove the breakdowns that have been institutionally built in urban policy planning and every government institution and school institution. We're going to have to apply the same methodological tools that we primarily use for the business world to goods and growing success over the next decade or two or more. Those tools will have to be applied at the federal government, state government level, municipal level, because they have the same, society has the same problem. There were barriers and breakdowns designed to undermine people of color. Those have to be removed. So if you theoretically say, look, if we could scale up the education to excellence and we break down the societal barriers, theoretically, there is a platform over the next decade or two for Black society in particular to not only catch up, but catapult. I see a quantum model occurring where if we match those two levers, all the breakdown and hindrances could really be catapulted over the next few decades to have a very powerful, robust, and where we should be, an optimized Black people society, which I think we could have and we would do extraordinarily well. We've got to put these levers in place to enable them.
Hey, from your mouth to God's ears. So just real quick, before we leave you, Douglas, if people need to get in touch with you, what is the best possible way?
Yeah, I'll just, and you can place my email up, doug.freeman. It's my first name, Doug.Freeman, Freeman, at UWGNY. U is in under, W is in world, G is in Grant, New York, NY.com. Doug.Freeman at UWGNY.com.
Awesome.
Mr. Grant McGaw, Mr. Douglas Freeman, we just want to thank you guys for coming and sharing your expertise on the show. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the opportunity, Grant. Once again, kudos to your fabulous work. Kudos to what a wonderful team. Together, this will be great.
Yes.
Thank you.
Genius is common, and I'll see you on the other side, gentlemen.
Thanks all.
All right.
It's been a pleasure and an honor.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Five-Star BDM, Brand Development Masters, is a professional consulting and advisory group keenly focused on business development services for the small to mid-sized business and entrepreneurs. Although every business is unique, they often share business development challenges that can be addressed through smart branding. Services include process improvement and operations, digital strategy and transformation, business intelligence, digital marketing, and personal branding. Our business and personal branding company has helped a number of professionals and organizations to optimize and grow. This results in more business, more opportunities, better reach, positive outcomes. Visit www.fivestarbdm.com today to learn more.